This video is going to be a response to Jeff Nippard's recent Is Obesity a Choice video with his little snarky tagline, the debate is settled or whatever the hell it is. It's funny, I actually agree with his overall point that people are not at fault for their obesity, but I differ in that I blame Jeff or other people like him. He's not old enough to really be to blame, but I don't blame people for their own obesity. I blame people like him. I'm going to explain why. So basically the main thing that he goes into in his video is genetics. Some people have higher energy expenditure, higher appetite, so on and so forth. I mean, we all know that. We all know, some people seem to have faster metabolism, some people seem to just be hungrier. That's not anything novel or groundbreaking. But here's the thing, genetics have been the same. I mean, I hope you'll grant genetics have been fairly similar over the past 100 years. I don't think we have changed dramatically in the last 100 years. So why is it just now that we're having a massive problem with obesity? And 100 years ago, somebody who could be billed as the fattest man in the world and make a good living at a circus, for his obesity, would now just be some regular person that you see at the corner store, right? And he hand waves this by saying, oh, well, food became cheaper and marketing. Really, my dude? Well, food, I disagree that food is cheaper, or became cheaper in the 70s. I mean, you look at, let's say the 50s, I don't think food was any harder to afford in the 50s. It's not like people were living in mud huts, starving. The 50s was a time of remarkable prosperity. I'm going to use the 50s as an example here, not because it's this, perfect, idyllic time where everything was just wonderful, and that's this mythical time we need to go back to. I'm going to use the 50s as my example here because it's known to be a very prosperous time, and nobody can come back and use the argument, well, Atlas, back in the day, people had to work really hard, and they could barely afford food. Well, okay, no, you had tons of people in the 50s who, had plenty of access to food, could afford more than all the food they wanted, and were not compelled to work a particularly hard or active job. And, things weren't perfect, but we didn't see issues like we see today. And I mean, things definitely weren't perfect. They had already introduced trans fats to the food supply. Procter & Gamble had basically provided seed money for the American Heart Association and planted those seeds, and gotten, trans fats in. We were already seeing an uptick in heart attacks and things of that nature. So things weren't perfect, but you just didn't see, you didn't see obesity on this level. You maybe would see some people that were overweight. Maybe some very, very, very rare cases would actually be seriously obese, but obviously things were not like they were today. So what changed? Did people's genetics change? People just suddenly had more appetite? No, and it wasn't marketing either. What changed is that the authorities, started recommending the wrong foods. They started telling us that the foods that are basically nutrient dense and satiating, the foods that get you to stop eating, things like eggs, red meat, things of that nature, are bad for us. They promoted for years and years the idea that dietary cholesterol was linked to, heart disease. That has finally, I believe they walked it back. I don't know if it was 2017, 2018. I mean, this ridiculous myth that, a lot of people were, noticing was wrong. For decades, although there was a lot of outcry against it at the time when it initially was adopted, which I believe was in the 50s. There was a lot of pushback, but for whatever reason, that agenda was able to go to the forefront, and they've been demonizing cholesterol ever since. Until, like I said, I think it was 2017 or something. And I didn't even know about this. It certainly got no fanfare. There was certainly no loud public apology. Hey guys, we're sorry. We've been misleading you for the past 5-6 decades. No, I never even knew that they. I was continuing to say until very recently that mainstream science was demonizing cholesterol, and someone corrected me. Oh yeah, no, they took that back. But of course, it was a very quiet retraction. And they're still tying a bunch of these good satiating foods that are going to make it a lot easier, not to be obese to various issues. They're still saying that we need to do meatless Mondays. We need to much as possible for health. I believe some, accredited organization just said, I forget who it was, World Health Organization. Somebody just said the maximum safe dose of red meat is like 0. So, basically, yeah, I'm putting this all at Jeff's feet because he's doing the science-based thing. He's, simping for science. He's out there, saying this is, science is what we should go off of. Well, science, and it's not just science. I'm not just bashing science. In some cases, you had hubristic scientists like Ansel Keys who just had their own pet theory, their own agenda. Couldn't take me wrong. That was the problem. But in a lot of cases, scientists were being bribed by big food. So I'm not trying to be partisan here. I mean, the food industry has definitely a lot of blame. I already got into Procter and Gamble trying to produce their cheap alternative to butter, and of course we all know that trans fats were bad, but they were being promoted as a safe alternative to animal fats for quite some time. And I forget when it took quite some time for trans fats to even be labeled as something that's not safe for humans, even though we've known they were bad for years. But you had plenty of scientists and doctors saying they were fine, at that time. So there's blame throughout, a number of power structures, But the point being, I mean, the scientific community absolutely 100% has been, has a huge share of the blame for why people stopped eating the foods that were filling them up and working normally with their appetite and making them stop eating when they had eaten enough calories. And again, I'm not saying it was perfect back then. I'm sure you could find some chubby people, but it was just a degree, it's an order of magnitude different today. The chubby people weren't as chubby, and the average person was certainly not chubby at all, right? And so while Jeff is saying your fat's not your fault, he's kind of just saying, if your only real solution is willpower, and if that doesn't work, well, too bad you're fat. He's not saying you can't, you can't possibly fix yourself, but he's just saying, some people have it harder than others. But like I was saying, those people that may have it harder than others, they didn't seem to have it that hard back in the day. And I'm sure if you go back to even the 1800s, you'll find accounts of people who are trying to lose some extra weight, right? But it's certainly a difference of degree at that time, right? And ultimately, if we do make it about willpower, you have some people on the other end that say, well, obesity is a choice. At the end of the day, calorie is a calorie, and if you just got calories, you're going to lose weight. And that's true. But here's the thing, I don't believe that somebody with average willpower shouldn't be able to have a healthy body weight. I think an average person should be healthy, right? You shouldn't have to have supernatural willpower to be able to stay healthy given the guidelines you're being given. Like, my parents are that example of someone who is, who has supernatural willpower and is able to actually stay healthy under the current guidelines. They've been eating, the low fat, low protein, standard recommendations that we've been getting from our experts who are supposedly backed by science, since the 70s. That's, they're fairly old now. So they've been living that way for quite some time. And I mean, these people eat like birds. They barely eat anything. Incredible discipline. And, so it can work, but these people, my parents are in, a very, very high percentile in terms of, willpower and discipline. I don't think you should have to be like in the top 10% in terms of willpower and discipline to be healthy. I think, the bare minimum, like your average person, like in the 50th percentile ought to be healthy, right? And, it seems like back in the 50s, back in the previous centuries, that was the case. Your average person didn't struggle with weight. And, at certain times you could say, okay, yeah, well, they had to work really hard and they couldn't afford food, but not in the 50s, In the 50s, your average person could afford all the food they wanted, and, at least quite a number of them weren't obligated to do any particularly hard manual labor. So, things were just set up in such a way that your average person with average willpower, average metabolism, no particular advantages, was nevertheless able to, maintain a relatively healthy weight. And the reason for that is they didn't have any experts misleading them about what was healthy and nutritious. They just, made sensible decisions based on, whatever they learned from, growing up, and that ultimately satiated them, and they didn't have nearly the issues that we see today. And I'm not saying everything was perfect in the 50s. It was this idyllic time that we should go back to. In a lot of ways, the 50s was already the product of just reckless social engineering, and there was a lot of rot under the surface in the 50s, and a lot of it was just being papered over, by a really good economy that was making a lot of problems that we're starting to see now not as apparent. But just in terms of food, they hadn't really gotten into, demonizing, the meat and eggs, the cholesterol, that sort of thing, which, changed the way people ate and, caused all the problems that we see today. And I mean, they still had plenty of junk food. I mean, they had soda. They had, you see these soda joints in the idyllic 50s town, like that's a part of how our cultural memory of the 50s goes. You see the soda joint or whatever, you see the donut shop, all that. The donuts probably being cooked in some sort of an animal fat at that time, but it's still calories. It's still not good for you. But that's more of a treat. And yeah, I mean, okay, I guess they've marketed like soft drinks to where you're supposed to be eating, drinking them with everything instead of as a treat. Sure, I mean, marketing played a role, but I mean, they had a ton of marketing back in the 50s too. I mean, have you seen advertisements from the 50s? They're manipulative, they're catchy. It's not like advertising wasn't a thing. I mean, they've been doing that for a while. This isn't something that started in the 70s, but I think what happened, what happened in that era was, the recommendations we got, and people did try to abide by them. They tried to eat lower fat. They tried to avoid the red meat, and of course they started adding the, substituting seed oils, trans fats, added sugar, trying to make that happen. And of course we had a health disaster, and like I say, I'm rambling now, and this is just like a one-take video, but there's plenty of blame to go around. You've got greedy corporations, you've got shady advisory bodies like the American Heart Association that are really just, puppets for, for corporate interests. I mean, you've got, I'd have to look this up, and I'm not going to look it up right now. You've got whatever companies were responsible for, blaming saturated fat for what sugar was actually doing in those studies. You can look this up. It's out there. I don't want to look it up right now because I'm in the middle of filming this, but bottom line, scientists have, and the academic establishment as a whole, have a lot of blame to share. So when you want to talk science-based and this is why obesity isn't your fault according to science and all, well, like I say, I agree that that obesity isn't people's fault because they're following bad advice. And if you're giving advice such that the average person can't follow that advice and get good outcomes without having supernatural willpower, then that's not their fault. We shouldn't expect, I mean, I'm not trying to have a libertarian, Jocko Willink bootstrap society where you just, no matter what, you pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and even if you're being given the worst advice, you never question it. You just wake up earlier and earlier and just eat less and less until you get, until you're not fat anymore. I think people, I think it's not your fault if you, in theory, even with the worst advice, you can still eat whatever these people are telling you to and just eat the right calories of it, and you're still going to lose weight. I mean, there was the guy that lost weight on Twinkies, So yeah, a calorie is a calorie, but there are some ways to eat calories that make it a whole lot harder and a whole lot easier. And, if you're following, the food pyramid that keeps getting put out by, whatever, which, my understanding is it's supposedly supported by science. I mean, my understanding is the scientific establishment stands behind the food pyramid. You eat according to that, you eat 2,000 calories according to that, it's not going to fill you up the same way as 2,000 calories of steak and eggs. That's just a fact, right? So the scientific establishment that told you minimize red meat, minimize eggs, minimize cholesterol, substitute that for heart healthy whole grains, which are not going to fill you up. There is definitely a lot of responsibility there. So anybody who wants to talk about science-based and have my respect needs to start all that by saying, hey man, we were wrong. We screwed over a lot of people. We honestly caused a lot of deaths. There are a lot of deaths, that are attributable to my faction. And man, we really screwed up and we want to make that right. So here's what we're going to do. That's what I need to hear when some science-based guy wants to tell me about why obesity is not your fault. I agree. It's not these obese people's fault. It's certain scientists' fault, honestly. And beyond even that, you have, I think the food choice is a big issue, but then you have all these science-based guys. Whenever we do find something that makes it easier for people to eat the right number of calories for them, like intermittent fasting. These people are on it like white on rice, trying to cite studies that say that it doesn't have any advantage. Just trying, anything outside the mainstream. That's a fad. That's not actually working. I'm not saying intermittent fasting works for everyone, but it certainly seems to make it a lot easier for a lot of people to eat the right number of calories for them, and there seems to be, a lot of pushback from these science-based types on that. I did actually look into the wrong video for it. I actually did look into a study on that recently, but we'll take care of that later. A lot of hostility to certainly a lot of hostility to paleo, even though that certainly makes it easier for people to eat an appropriate number of calories for them, just based on the fact that provides more protein, more nutrient density, fills you up more on the same number of calories on protein. Hell, even these science-based bodybuilders, or bodybuilding advocates or fitness influencers or whatever, they're the first to tell, to even start talking about, oh, you really don't need that much protein. They're trying to show how smart they are. They're smarter than the gym bro that's just eating, way too much protein. Oh, well, there's no benefit to protein beyond, 0.08 grams per kilogram of ideal body weight or whatever the hell, right? There's no benefit to that. You shouldn't eat more than that. But then if people are struggling to lose weight, what would help them? Protein. Protein is more satiating than any other macronutrient rather. But if you're trying to be this, good little science-based person, you can't eat more than, 0.08, grams per pound. So, well, maybe if you're struggling to lose body weight, eating a little more protein would help, because it's satiating and it's not particularly, likely to contribute a lot to your calories. It's a pretty good thing to eat if you're struggling with body weight, but these people are telling you, oh, don't eat too much protein, don't skip breakfast. Make sure you, don't fast. That's a fad diet, don't try low carb. Not that I'm into low carb personally. I've never liked it. It's never worked for me, but it works for a lot of people. Point being, there are a number of strategies that a lot of people who are outside of this scientific establishment are finding really, really helpful for not just losing weight, but making it fairly easy. Like I've found strategies that make a combination of, some longer fasts, mostly like short-term, like 16-20 hour fasts, and just nutrient dense, basically paleo style eating, lots of organ meats and fruits. I found that makes cutting body fat not really that hard, especially when you compare it to more of what your mainstream science-based experts recommend, which is just calorie tracking. I've done that. That's rough, man. It really is. So they're not really offering anything that's making it easy for the average person, to lose weight. They have a history that, it is just god awful in terms of, what they've been promoting over the years. And what they're promoting now is certainly better than what it used to be, but it's not really especially helpful, especially compared to some people that, aren't maybe as science-based, but are just, finding strategies that seem to be working in the real world. Yeah, so I agree with Jeff. Your fat is not your fault necessarily. There's always going to be that, that percentage that just, if confronted with an abundance of food is going to eat to excess. There's going to be people kind of on the low end of the bell curve, and we can't really fix that. Some people are going to have less discipline. They're going to have a hard time controlling themselves, even when they're getting the best advice and they're in the best situation. But I'm not talking about them. That's always going to be there. We can't fix that. But I think the average person who's kind of right in the middle of the bell curve, given advice from good experts, ought to be able to, be at least healthy and, not overweight without too much effort at all, really. It shouldn't be, it shouldn't require any willpower to be average, and that's I think that is in fact how it is when you're not being misled by the experts. You're eating the foods you want to eat that actually fill you up, and maybe by the time you're 50 you've put on a couple extra pounds, but you're not seeing morbidly obese 20-somethings, 30-somethings, as the norm, which it is in some parts of the country. And this is not just just advertising or food got cheaper. My goodness. Anyway, this ended up running a little bit longer than I wanted to. I'm going to try to par this down into like a well-written Instagram post and actually write it up so that it's more concise and I say exactly what I want to say, because I've rambled here and it's probably not the most clear. But I'm just trying this thing, like I said on my previous video, where I'm just going to make like one take, videos, not too much time, and just try to knock out an idea, and then hopefully at some point I can actually refine it on Instagram, because like I say, I'm a better writer. It's easier for me to just do a really well thought out, well articulated written post than it is for me to actually edit that into a video, which is just too much effort for me. So thanks for watching. I hope you guys enjoy stuff like this, and yeah, Jeff, take some responsibility for all the people that your people have killed, man. Like I don't know, like your folks are murderers, dude. It's messed up.